Thank you, President. My question is to the Attorney-General. Last year you removed the provisions relating to children from the Bail Amendment Act 2023. You committed to the development of separate reforms to keep children out of custody while, and I quote, providing an approach to bail recognising the unique vulnerabilities and complex disadvantages that children can face. However, this morning we have heard that the government has dumped these reforms. There will be no presumption of bail for children, and instead there will be a trial of electronic monitoring for children on bail. So my question is, will the Attorney advise what information has led to the government so dramatically reversing its position on this reform?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and I thank Mr Ettershank for his question. There's a few issues that I have with the way you framed your question. Announcements in relation to electronic monitoring today for bail compliance is not instead of other reforms in the bail space. You'll appreciate that last year we spent a significant amount of time debating the bail reforms, and indeed we did last week because members of the chamber wanted to revisit the will of the House in relation to reforms that are designed to ensure that vulnerable, non-violent criminals, non-violent alleged offenders are not inappropriately remanded, and that we can focus our bail tests on those who pose an unnecessary or unacceptable risk to the community. When it comes to children, we have very low rates of children in remand and custody, and we've had the Minister for Corrections take us through that on several occasions. I have spoken in depth with Justice Partners about practical implementation issues of child bail models. The most substantive proposed change, presumption of bail, so assessing whether a child is based on an unacceptable risk or not, is what's already occurring. And I think that I think you and I had an exchange, and I know some members of the Greens, Ms Copsey in particular, about what's happening in practice. The reality is that when bail decision makers, particularly in the courts, are having conversations with Victoria Police and lawyers that represent children, the vast majority, if not all of those young people, are meeting the tests of exceptional circumstances, and what the conversation comes back down to is whether they are unacceptable risk or not. That is what's happening in practice. It is our proposal that that is an appropriate setting, because that's what's happening. It's the risk to community that is being assessed by the bail decision makers. And that is where the settings will remain. There is a youth justice bill coming to the Parliament. We've been under development for some time. That will be mid-year. That will contain the consideration of electronic monitoring for bail compliance. It will have raised the age, and it will have a number of other programs and legislation that is all about embedding our approach to youth justice, which is driven by diverting as many children away from the justice system as possible. But when it comes to bail considerations, as I've described what's happening in practice, that will be non-changed in the Youth Justice Bill, whilst we introduce electronic monitoring can be informed by that evidence and continued conversation with those with experience in the system.
Mr Ettershank, with supplementary.
I thank the Attorney for her response. By way of supplementary, you've also announced the trial of electronic monitoring for children on bail. This policy failed to make it through Parliament in 2018. It is opposed by the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and, as of a few minutes ago, Save the Children. It deprives liberty and does not reduce offending. In defending this government's previous position against this monitoring in 2024, Deputy Premier Carroll noted existing powers to track young offenders and the powers of the Youth Parole Board. Attorney, you've said that you do not want to create a debate about, quote, youth crime crises that do not exist. So, Attorney, will you explain how this announcement will not exactly encourage such a debate about youth crime crisis stigmatise offenders and lead to worse outcomes?
Minister.
Thank you, President. And that's a rather complex question for a minute response, given I didn't manage to finish my answer to your first substantive. So more than happy to continue this conversation. You are confusing a few different policies that this is in relation to bail compliance. This isn't in relation to parole, which was what you have referred to. This is a policy, this is a trial that will be supported by some, not by everyone, and that, frankly, that's where you find yourself in the portfolio of a Justice Minister. It's about balance. What I would draw your attention to is, of course, we've considered issues such as stigma, such as badge of honour. We've considered these issues. We've considered the fact that there will be a cohort of children that it will be inappropriate to have electronic monitoring on because of traumatic backgrounds. There is a remedial aspect to monitoring children on bail. If kids on bail are complying with their conditions, if they're staying home, if they're engaging in education, looking for employment opportunities, they are less likely to go and re-offend and end up having their bail revoked and end up in prison. So you talk about depriving liberty. This is about ensuring that we can keep them out of jail.